the world around us is changing quite fast, and with everything that's sort of happening, and perhaps this has given you an opportunity to think about what's next in your career, or maybe you've been thinking about it already, but you're not sure what's the next right step, and maybe you know what's your next right step, but not sure how to go about it. And in addition to that, we keep hearing about networking, and it's a thing we need to do, right? But for most of us, it's so uncomfortable. So how do we actually utilize our network? How do we expand our network? These are some of the things we're going to be talking about today. And I'm really, really excited to have Dr. Dawn Graham with us. So let me give you a little bit information about who she is. So Dr. Dawn Graham is a career switch coach. She's a TEDx speaker. She's a LinkedIn learning instructor and a host of the popular call-in show Dr. Dawn on Careers on Sirius XM Radio, channel 132. She's also a regular contributor to Forbes.com under the leadership channel and the career director for the executive MBA program at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Her latest book, Switchers, which is about how smart professionals change careers and seize success, combines her experience as a career coach, licensed psychologist, and a former corporate recruiter to give career switchers the strategies to break through obstacles and land the job they want. So I'm really excited to have her on with us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elena. I am the founder of Agaragimova and managing partner at Bessern, where we work with corporates on productivity and well-being for their employees. I also contribute to various publications in the Middle East. And this is by far one of my favorite topics to talk about. I feel that this is something people always reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I'm really, really excited to have Dr. Dawn with us. I would like to welcome her at this time to join us. She is by far one of the most known people within the career change industry. So I cannot thank you enough for being here, Dr. Dawn. And let us go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Elena. I'm excited to be here, and thank you to everybody who's joining us today.
All right, so let's just go ahead and kick off. Let's just dive right into it. So let's just start with talking a little bit about demystifying what it means to network. So that's always one of the top things we talk about when it comes to careers and kind of growing and our careers are changing. And then, people say network, and it seems to be the scary thing. So can we just talk about, what is really networking, and what it is and what it's not, essentially. And do we network when we need something, or how do we go about it?
Well, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people think about networking when they need something, so a job, or they're looking for clients, or they're starting a business. And I think that's actually one of the biggest mistakes of networking, and what makes it so uncomfortable for so many, because when you're in a position of lower power, say, and you need to ask somebody for something, of course that's going to be uncomfortable. So if that's your definition of networking, then I think there's an opportunity to shift that to make it more enjoyable. And I'm just going to start this, Elena, with a fact about me. I'm an introvert, so I was not a natural born networker, and it wasn't until I worked on my dissertation research, which is on networking and how introverts and extroverts approach it, that I really understood why it was so uncomfortable and what I was doing wrong. I also really started to understand how critical it is to not only, certainly it's critical in the job search, but it's critical to your career overall, because even if you're a stellar performer, if other people don't know what value you bring to the market, and a lot of those people are making decisions around your career, then you're not going to get selected for those opportunities. You're not going to learn about those opportunities. So it was an awakening for me to realize that I was looking at networking incorrectly, and that there were actually comfortable ways to network as an introvert. So I think what it is simply building relationships, learning about other people, building some trust. Definitely helping others is a great way to network. And once you kind of disconnect networking from an ask or a need, it starts to become just about building relationships, kind of like you built relationships when you were young in school and you got to know people and you shared lunch together and you shared experiences together. So I think when we start to look at it that way, it becomes a little bit more approachable for most of us and a little bit more comfortable for most of us.
Absolutely. And so you talked a little bit about, understanding our value. So you mentioned that. And before we go deeper into how do you actually network, especially if you're an introvert, what are some tips and strategies? But when we're talking about understanding our value before we essentially put our personal brand into the market, what are some things we need to consider, especially for those individuals, like so many on this webinar, who are looking for career change? So how do we then, how do we identify what's the next step, what's the right next step, and then how do we then present it to the network?
So I'm glad you brought that up, Elena, because I think this is another place where if you are networking and reaching out to people and you find it's not working, this is often the reason why. One of the things when you're networking with a intention in mind, so you're looking to get a job, you need to explain to the people you know, the people you've already established relationships with, what you do in a way that they can explain it to somebody else. So I call this being an ambassador in the book, because an ambassador not only is somebody who is willing to share their network with you or spend their social capital on you because you have a relationship, but they also know how to sell you. And that's the critical part that most of us don't give to our network. So they need the words, they need to understand the value we bring to the audience we're targeting. And once they understand that, then they can keep their eyes open for opportunities, or they can make connections about, oh, I should introduce you to this person, or I saw this company was looking for somebody just like that. But that's what we need to do. We need to make sure they understand the value we're bringing to the market and how they can sell that so they can help us.
Great. So what it sounds like is networking is just about being curious, but also making it easier for others to help us in our search, meaning that we need to essentially understand what is it that we're looking for and what is that next step can be. What I like about your book, Switchers, is, first of all, it's a brilliant, brilliant book. I feel like it just gives a step-by-step of what one should do when it comes to career change. And you explore some great points about career change. And one of the things you talked about is the non-negotiables, which I really like. Can you talk a little bit about that? So I think that's very interesting for many people, because I think we forget about the non-negotiables. We kind of look into kind of doing without actually exploring what are the non-negotiables, what are we willing to trade off essentially as well, if anything.
And this relates to your previous question as well, because it's all about being easy to help. And I think when you're easy to help, your network is eager to help you. And one of the things I've noticed that people do is they put up a lot of barriers to being helped. So they say, I'm not willing to move, or I'm not willing to have a commute over this length of time, or I'm not willing to travel, or I'm only willing to work for a top brand name company. And so when you start putting all these barriers in the way, then your network contacts are really limited in how they can help you. So I think what the non-negotiable part is about in the book is that, especially if you're looking to make a career switch where you're looking to change function or industry, sometimes you have to be more open, because you have to recognize that you're moving in a direction that you don't have a traditional background for. So looking at how can I be as successful as possible in my next step, which might mean you have to take a step back in level, or it might mean that you have to take a salary cut for a period of time, maybe not forever, but maybe initially, or maybe you have to endure a commute to a business that's further than you want to travel, but will enable you to get on the right career path ladder to make your switch. So I think when I talk about non-negotiables, I ask clients, what are your true non-negotiables? Because most of us don't have that many. Yes, we'd love to not have to take a salary cut. We'd love not to have to commute for a long time, but are those things worth it to sacrifice to get on the ladder that you want? So I ask people to do a really hard look at what are you willing to sacrifice? And my end result is if you're not willing to sacrifice anything, or you're only willing to sacrifice very, very few things, it's going to be much, much harder to make that switch, at least initially. Some of those sacrifices are likely only temporary, but those temporary sacrifices might get you on the right career ladder, which 2-3 years from now, you'll be much happier that you did take those steps back to take more steps forward.
Absolutely. And one of the things also you mentioned in your book is, sometimes it's just not the right time to make a career change. So as you mentioned, right, maybe if you're not willing to sort of sacrifice, then perhaps maybe delay it for a couple more years until you are ready, right? So let's say somebody is looking to take the career change and they're willing to make the sacrifices, and perhaps, and because they're changing careers, they now maybe need to expand their networks in areas where they are not really known. So how would you advise somebody, how do you meet people, especially maybe on the online world? How would you connect with people on LinkedIn that you don't know? What are some tips and strategies?
I think when you're looking at building your network, especially in a new area, one of the things I always tell people is start with the people you know. And I talk about this in my TEDx pretty extensively, that we often underestimate the people we've already built strong relationships with. So that might be college friends or people in our family, or people who are neighbors, dormant contacts, which are those people we may have lost touch with over the years but used to work with or used to be neighbors. And a lot of times these individuals have their own circles and their own networks that we're not aware of. And it's really easy to say, oh, that's my sibling, I know all the same people, but you may be surprised because we're all on social media. We all have our own lives and our own circles of friends. So I'd say if those people who are closest to you don't know what your career goal is, they can't help you. So this goes back to ensuring that you're making those people who have already built a relationship with you ambassadors, because you might be surprised that they know somebody at the target company you're looking for, that they know somebody in the industry you're looking to switch to, and a warm introduction from somebody who knows you is going to be much more powerful than a cold call. So I always say start with the people you know and make sure you're specific about what you're looking for. If you don't have that warm introduction, what I say then is invest in them first. So before you reach out and ask for a 20-minute phone call, have you invested in that person and made them, at least invested as much time as you're asking them to invest in you? So for example, maybe you follow them on social media and they post a lot and you're commenting on their work, or maybe they publish in a journal or a magazine, or maybe they have a book, or maybe they've spoken on panels that you can attend. So I would say if you're looking to move into a new industry, start to identify those people who you want to build in your network and follow them, invest time in them. Because I'll tell you, when somebody reaches out to me on LinkedIn who is a cold call and doesn't personalize their message, or just says, hey, I'm looking for a new career, you're a career person, can I have 10 minutes of your time? I'm probably not going to say yes to that. But if somebody reaches out and says, I've read your book and I follow your podcast, and I have 2 specific questions on something you said in your last article, I would love to connect with you. Well, now I think, wow, this person has invested in me, so I can invest in them. So I think that's one of the, again, critical pieces we miss. We get very excited about our job search. We make a list of people and we just start reaching out and saying, oh, I'm passionate about this, would love to talk to you, without really doing our homework first.
Yes, that's an excellent point. It's quite often, and I imagine you get a lot of those, is that it's almost as when people reach out, we have to keep in mind, we don't want to give somebody homework to do, right? So this is what it means to be prepared, right? So let's say a person is wanting to do a career change. Is it as simple as applying online? Let's say you are a mid-level to senior level professional, maybe in your early 40s, perhaps. What are the strategies at that stage? Because a lot of the people that we sort of talk to in our business, they feel as if maybe it's too late, or how do you change career at that age, essentially at that level in your career? Is it applying online, or are there other ways to go about it?
So I'll be honest, I rarely promote applying online. And I think that's because online is oversaturated. And as somebody who's worked as a corporate recruiter, I know that a lot of the best jobs don't even make it to public job boards because a lot of people, for example, are hired internally. There was one study that said, you know, over 50% of jobs were internal hires. Now that I think seems a little bit high, but if you think about it, if you hire and you have an open position on your team, the first place you're going to look is your network, people you know, people who've proven themselves. So I do believe a lot of jobs get filled this way. And if you're applying online, what that means is you're limiting your opportunities to just those jobs that bubble up to the surface. I think the other thing with online, depending on, you know, the rules and regulations of a company, sometimes even if the company does have an internal hire, they have to publicly post the job for a period of time, even though they have no intention of hiring somebody, or maybe the job's been out for a while and they have hired somebody and it's just still up there lingering on the internet. So I think it's a little bit more difficult to really understand what is real online. So if you're going to use that strategy, what I would say is also ensure you're partnering it with networking, meaning if you can find somebody inside the company who could shepherd your resume to the hiring manager or to HR to make sure that it is a real job and you are being considered, that's going to significantly increase your chances. That said, I think if you're looking to make a career switch, networking is pretty critical because you're essentially asking a hiring manager to take a chance on you when you don't have a traditional background. Now, depending on how big your switch is, that may not be as big of an issue. So maybe you have a lot of the transferable skills and you just have to close a few gaps. But if you're looking to make a significant switch, so maybe a function and industry switch, this is where your network is going to be critical to assure a hiring manager that you learn quickly and that you're very resourceful and that you're able to understand how to get things done in ambiguous situations. Or maybe you've had situations in your past where you've had to get up to speed quickly on something with little instruction, or you've made other switches in your past where you've been successful. But the problem is, if you apply online, you may never get the chance to speak to a hiring manager because an applicant tracking system or, you know, a recruiter will weed you out because you don't have a traditional background. So I think it's important to get in front of that decision maker as a switcher, which your network can really be a huge boost for. And then two, you have to present your case. You have to do the work for the hiring.
I think we lost you. Hello?
Manager to show them that.
Yeah, we lost you for a second, but you're back. Go ahead. Great. So you mentioned also, so what it sounds like is that we almost need to continuously network, because if it's not a, you know, if we don't network when we need something, it's almost like a continuous journey and a continuous also reflecting on what is it that you're doing and perhaps looking at your achievements and remembering those transferable skills, because we do so much throughout our careers, sometimes we even forget. And another thing you mentioned is, you know, coming from a background of recruiter and sort of working with recruiters and trying to get noticed within that space, you did a little dive into psychology in your book, Psychology of the Recruiter. So when it comes to career change seekers, what do recruiters look for? So let's say you're switching from, I don't know, a very technical role into, maybe you want to go into marketing or general manager, or if you have some examples to give us. So what does a recruiter look for in a career change seeker?
So one of the things I think that can be really difficult for the job seeker who's looking to make a switch to do is rebrand themselves. And it's not because they don't necessarily have the transferable skills. They likely do, but we become so intertwined with our, you know, our job title or our identity, our career identity, that we, especially when we're in an interview or when we're trying to impress a recruiter or somebody who's hiring, we automatically go to our strengths. And what may be our biggest accomplishments in our past may not be the best ones to put forward if you're making a switch. So first off, I tell people you have to present yourself with the value you add to the market, not your title. Because, for example, I had somebody who had a PhD, had her doctorate in chemistry, and she was in pharma and she wanted to move to the business side of pharma. And she would consistently start with the fact that she had a PhD in chemistry. Well, she was also getting her MBA and had a number of concrete business accomplishments, but she was so tied to her identity of being a PhD in chemistry that she would introduce herself this way. And essentially what you're saying is, I'm not what you want. And so I told her, you have to match first and then stand out second. And what I mean by that is your most impressive accomplishments may not be your most relevant accomplishments for this switch. So we looked at her background and we removed the PhD from the front and center of her resume, and she started introducing herself not by her title, but by the business skills she had and the value she added to the business side, which opened more doors for her and got her interviews. And the best part was that at the end, when they were down to 2 candidates, they asked her, now what makes you different? And she said, well, I also have a PhD in chemistry and understand the research and development side. And so that was the boost that got her the job, because this unique side was a great combo for the role. But so it's that idea of match first, stand out second. And so I think one of the things that from a psychology perspective, if you think about it, the job search from a recruiter's perspective is about elimination, not selection. So they get 200, 300 resumes and they only have time to interview maybe 8 to 10. And so their mindset is one of elimination, weed out, weed out. All right, this person's a PhD. I don't need a PhD. I need a business person. So you're gone. So if you think about it from that perspective, as a job seeker, strategically, you want to be as close of a match as you can up front, and then use some of those unique skills you bring as a switcher to kind of close the deal versus the other way around.
Yeah, and I want to just remind the audience that you can start dropping your questions. I already see a couple of questions coming in. I see you guys. Go ahead and start dropping your questions in the question box. And if those of you who are raising your hand, make sure you just drop it in the chat box. So to follow up on what you were saying, Dawn, so let's say that you are a person who sort of, maybe your experience sort of matches to what you were doing, but let's say you don't have a lot of experience in this new field. What are some ways that you can, you can get that experience, especially in the world of maybe, I don't know, gig economy, or what are some ways for a mid-level professional to try to get that experience, let's say in a field that they've never been in?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways, Elena, and one is something you just mentioned is, you can create your own internship. You can create your own situation. Maybe you work in a large company and you ask to take on a project that is more aligned with the type of switch you want to make, so you can try it out. Or maybe you can do some volunteer work with a nonprofit organization or a school system who's looking for somebody with those types of skills to, again, get that experience. In some cases, you might seek certifications or other educational tools to fill in those gaps. But I also think it's important, especially when you're communicating in an interview, to also talk about those things you've overcome. So maybe you've had a series of if not actual career switches, maybe you've worked on a transformation project, or you've handled a crisis, or you had to get something done with very little direction. So don't forget some of the skills that you pull from those areas when you're trying to convince a hiring manager about your adaptability. But I also think something that people often don't consider, but is a really good way to make a major career switch, is getting what I call a stepping stone job, or other people may call it a bridge job. So for example, I had an attorney who she worked in a corporate role and wanted to eventually move into human resources in a tech startup, and of course applied, and wasn't what the tech startups were looking for. So what she ended up doing is using her legal background to move into a comp and benefits role in her current firm, where she'd already proven herself as an attorney. And she did that for a few years while she gained some peripheral human resources skills, and then eventually made her final switch to HR in a tech company. So I know that some people may say, oh, well, that's going to take a lot longer. But if you have the opportunity to do a bridge job, a couple of the benefits of that are that you may not have to take as big of a salary cut. So if this person had moved directly from her attorney role into a tech startup as an entry-level HR person, she certainly would have taken multiple steps back and a big salary cut. But because of the way she did it, yes, it took her a couple more years, but she maintained her salary and she was able to start at the tech company at a higher level. So it's, again, all about these trade-offs and what is going to make sense for you and where you are in your career and what's going on with your family and all of that, that you have a lot of options. And I think it's important to explore all of them to see what's best for you.
Mm-hmm. What also it sounds like as you're talking, you know, I keep thinking how important it is to first identify, you know, what is it that you're looking for, and you know, to kind of approach it with some strategy, essentially, with some way forward, right? So it's a lot of self-exploration as well in this process. And as you said, it might take some time, but time will pass anyway. So we might as well be using that time in a way that is getting us closer to our goal, or we can kind of be stuck in this thing and not take any steps forward. So it's almost like you said, sometimes a step backward means a jump forward in a couple of years, and that time goes like this. And we all feel it, I'm sure, with this 2020. It feels like forever, but quick at the same time. So I have a couple of questions. I'm going to go ahead and start bringing the audience in. So somebody asked, yeah, so this is a great one. So they said, first of all, thank you for invaluable insights. What are your recommendations for someone who has taken a long break from a managerial position for family or health reasons and who wishes to return to the job market and explore a new function and industry? So that's a good question. Maybe returning mothers as well, so that can cover those individuals as well, and just people who took a break for whatever reason. What would you recommend?
So yeah, I think this is very popular. So one, I think companies have come a long way in understanding that people need to do these things for various reasons. So I think that's a positive thing. It used to be a couple decades ago that if you stepped off the ladder, there were a lot of consequences to that. But I think there are more companies that recognize that people are complex and they have families and they have other things going on. So first off might be identifying some of those companies who have a culture of really understanding that, especially if you might still be in a situation where you need to attend to things outside of work. Also, I think it depends on how long you've been out. I mean, 2 years can be a long time for some, but some people are out 10 years. And so what we know about the market is it changes so quickly. And over the last 6 months, we've seen that pretty much amplified. So I think first and foremost, you need to understand what has changed in the market, specifically around the area you're looking to get into, because what you stepped out of may look very different now. And I think if you just go in thinking that it looked the same, you're going to have some misalignments. So if you're coming back into the market, a good thing to do is to start with networking. Start maybe rejoining associations that you used to be a part of or that are aligned with where you want to go. Start talking to people who are in the areas that you're interested in. Start really kind of doing this, I'll call it a mini research project, to kind of understand the state of the union and what that looks like. And then I also think we change as well. So I think this self-reflection is very critical to understand what is it that you value. Maybe if you have had a family, you're not interested in a lot of travel, or maybe you your family has moved out and gone to college or away, and now you can do a lot of travel. So I think you have to understand what is it that you want and what aligns with where you are. I always say, look at 3 things when you're exploring careers. The skills you bring to the market and where your gaps are so you can close those gaps, what the market is asking for, so what's really growing right now, and then what are your interests? And a good question to ask yourself as you're exploring all of these is, what challenge do I want to solve in the world right now? And what skills do I have to solve that challenge? And when you answer that question, then you can start to talk to your network about where you might find those opportunities, what types of companies are working on that, what types of industries are moving in this direction, and start to build your network that way. But I do think it's really important as you're moving back into a work situation that you assess all of these things so that you don't make assumptions based on where you were previously.
Great. And another follow-up question from some of the things that you mentioned earlier is, somebody asked, Dr. Dawn, in terms of the online applications, are you including it in this category, the applications made directly to jobs on company sites? So is it all the same, whether we're applying on LinkedIn or a company website? Is the online just online? Is it all pretty much the same?
So actually, that's a really good question. And so first off, recruiters can tell if you applied on their website or if you applied on a big board. And I always think it's better to apply on the website because it shows you've taken the extra step to look on the website. And traditionally, if you think about how jobs are filled, first step is you look at your network. Do I know anyone? Or maybe you look at your company and say, hey, is there somebody within the company who already understands our corporate culture, who can make a shift over here? That doesn't work. You might post it on your company website initially because it's probably free versus some of the big job boards, and it will attract a certain type of applicant, namely people who are really interested in your company. So I would say that, you know, even if you do network, chances are you're going to have to fill out the online application at some point, but you're always going to get a better result if you can reach out to somebody in the company and have your resume shepherded to the right person and make sure it doesn't get stuck in the applicant tracking system. And the data out there show that about 75% of applications get weeded out, sometimes because of not having enough keywords or the right experience, but other times it's because the formatting was off or the system couldn't read the template that you use. So it could be something silly and you think, wow, I'm a great candidate, but I'm not hearing anything. So if you don't have a contact in the organization, I think it's perfectly reasonable to email the recruiter, which if it's not on the website, you often can find that information on LinkedIn, and just say, I just want to make sure you received my credentials or my resume. Very excited about speaking more about the job. Because if you did get stuck in the applicant tracking system, this may prompt them to weed you out. Now, if you do this and you reach out over LinkedIn, I will say your LinkedIn profile better reflect the brand value you bring to this role, because chances are the first thing they're going to do is look at your LinkedIn, and if they say, wow, this person has a lot of skills we're looking for, maybe I should go look at their resume, that's going to benefit you. But if your LinkedIn profile is sparse or is branded towards the past and old positions, that's not going to help you very much.
Yeah, and speaking of CVs, so this is something actually we were having a little chat on a LinkedIn post with fellow career development people, and somebody was asking about video CVs. I'm just curious, how do you feel about video CVs? So let's say some companies are now asking individuals to submit those video CVs. What do you think about them? Do you think that, you know, sending a 60-second video CV is a good idea? If it is, what it should look like? Should people, you know, do we just kind of create one and go with it? Like, what do you think about this in general?
Yeah, so I think the answer is it depends. I'm always of the mindset that in a lot of ways you should follow the directions of what the company asks for to an extent. And I say to an extent because most companies will say, don't reach out to us, but I just told you that it's okay to reach out to them. So those are like the things that you can break the rules on. But if they ask for a 60-second video, I guess my impression of them as a recruiter is that in some ways, unless the video, meaning unless you're applying to something where that's going to be a regular part of your job, it can be a little bit deceptive for the hiring team, because some people are just better at being on camera and more comfortable with it, and other people aren't. But I think that's the same case for the interview. You know, a lot of hiring managers, unfortunately, are not trained to interview, so they end up hiring the person who's the best interviewer versus the best candidate for the job. So I think video doesn't necessarily solve that problem. But if you are asked to do that, what I would say is make sure your video is as high quality as you can get it. Don't look at it as a just kind of a peripheral thing to add to your resume, because if it's part of the evaluation process, they are going to evaluate you on things like how you speak, or can they see you, or is what you're saying succinct. And again, looking at the type of job, if you're going for a very creative role, they may be looking for things that are particularly creative. If you're going for a high-tech role, they might be looking for extras that show your tech capability. So always consider, when you're applying for a job, regardless of what medium you're using, what the audience's pain points are and how you can communicate how you solve those in your application and in your interview answers and in any other documentation that they may ask you to complete.
You know what it sounds like? Almost as if, you know, you are the product. So, you know, in the MBA programs, this is what they study, right? You know, how do you actually create a product and you launch it into the market? So essentially it's, you are the product, you're launching yourself into the job market. And this is where you need to understand your value and your audience more, first and foremost, to understand what is the pain that you essentially other customers that are going to be buying what you have to offer. So that's an excellent point.
Well,
a couple more.
I want to tag on to that, because I think one important thing to think about in terms of your strategy when you're applying to jobs or when you're in a job search is the job search is not about you. And what I mean by that is, yes, of course, the cover letter is about you and the interview you're talking about yourself, but at the end of the day, and I mentioned this a minute ago, hiring managers are not often trained to hire. It's not their day job. It's not, you know, it may be something they do 2 or 3 times a year. And they may not ask you the questions that you had prepared for. They may not ask the questions that get to your best skill set or your most relevant skill set. So you have to be prepared as the candidate to go in there with a mindset of, I'm going to relay how I solve this person's problems or this department's problems, and be prepared to communicate that regardless of the questions you're asked. So when you think about the job search is not about me, but rather what problems I solve, again, it helps you strategically get into the right mindset of presenting yourself in a way that's helpful to the person who has to make that decision.
That's such a good point, because I think that's the misconception that we often have when we're applying to jobs. We expect that the person sitting across from us is going to ask all the right questions and they're going to just magically know that we're the right candidate. And unfortunately, it's not always the case. And this is where we need to focus on the things that we can control in this situation, which is how much we prepare. So that's an excellent point. A couple more questions here, and you guys, I see your questions, keep them coming. We'll try to get through them as many as we can. So what about, does the job search look the same for somebody, or the career change, sorry, look the same for somebody who is going from for-profit to non-profit? So if somebody's been, I don't know, in a corporate and now they want to enter in a non-profit world, is it going to be the same sort of steps, or is there something else to consider?
So I think no matter what type of change you're making, you always have to, again, go back to your audience and what their assumptions are about you. And this is kind of where my psychology comes in. And if you're going, for example, from a for-profit to a nonprofit, and think about what are my assumptions about people who make that switch? Or even if you're going from technology to a non-tech role or vice versa, what are my assumptions, or what are the general assumptions or biases about people who make that switch, and you need to be ready to talk about those, because chances are that the hiring manager or the recruiter is thinking them. And you know, in the US, for example, one of the biggest, I would say, assumptions is that if you're going from nonprofit to corporate, that you're used to working at a slower pace, or you don't have as much innovation, or there's a lot of bureaucracy, and you know, you're not as quick at getting things passed through the system. And so are these true or not true? You know, maybe, but regardless, you have to understand what some of these potential biases will be, so that you can come in with examples of how you'll fit into that new culture, whatever that new culture is. So that's why I think it's really helpful to do your research on a company, to talk to your network about, hey, what are people rewarded for here? What do they value? Who are the heroes? What do they tend to recognize people for? And once you start to understand that, then you can frame examples in light of those things. So again, it's really about getting into the mindset of the hiring team and the recruiter, and framing those examples in a way that aligns to them, versus just putting your most impressive accomplishments out, which may not be the most relevant ones.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have another question, and this one, so it's usually we have individuals that are sort of going from corporate, and then maybe they're looking to start a business. But what if you have been an entrepreneur for many years, right? So you've been an entrepreneur, maybe you've come from an HR background, you spent a few years in HR, then you kind of, you know, you spend another year or so perhaps doing some entrepreneurship things, and now you want to go back to the corporate job. Is that gap going to be easy to close? Is it going to be, again, those same strategies to avoid people making assumptions about us? Do we then communicate what is it that we learned, or how does that look like for somebody?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think somebody who had a business and was able to do that successfully for a number of years brings so many transferable skills to a corporation. So I definitely, if I was looking at a resume, I saw that I would personally interview that person, just because I think they likely have a lot to offer. Again, thinking about the assumptions that you might have as a corporate hire, you may think, well, this person's used to running the show, and they're not going to be satisfied if they're not running the project or running the team, you know, because they've been used to the last several years taking care of everything and making the decisions. So again, the assumptions that come out, you would want to go into that interview showing how you're collaborative and you're a team player. And sure, you can make decisions independently, but you also recognize the value of getting buy-in and influencing stakeholders. So again, it's really about understanding your audience and what some of those biases may be. And certainly as an entrepreneur, you likely have developed a breadth of skills that are going to be valuable. But I think it's super important for you, again, as that job seeker, to not go in with, I can do all of these things, pick one and put me somewhere, because a hiring manager is not going to take the time to think about that, or they're not going to look at your resume and say, wow, this person has so many skills, let me think about all of the places they can be useful. You have to be targeted and direct. You have to know what position you're going for, which skills are going to be most relevant. And in some cases, and this is hard if you're making a switch, you might have to take some things off of your resume or not speak about some examples, because in the interview or in the resume, they kind of, you know, have you go left turn. So you're thinking, wow, I did all these things, it's going to make me a better candidate. But the hiring manager is thinking, this is too complex, I don't know where this person fits, I'm going to go on to somebody who tells me exactly what they can do and how they can do it. So be careful and pick those targeted skills. And again, goes back to doing the work for the hiring manager. You want them to end that interview with, I see exactly where this person fits, I see exactly how their skills are going to help me, and I want to move this person to the next step.
Excellent. And somebody is halfway through your book, Switchers, and they have a question about it. They have a question about Plan A. It's clear that you are in favor of one single plan, but how flexible can we be when it comes to changing our plans a bit?
So I'll tell you why I put that in there, and it probably is the part of the book that's brought up the most, because you hear a lot about fallback plans and things like that, but I'll tell you why it's so critical. Being a switcher means that your network's going to be a significant part of your job search. Also, it's going to be a significant part of your job search is convincing a hiring manager to roll the dice on you and take a risk. They're not going to spend their social capital or take a risk on somebody who seems wishy-washy. So for example, if you go into an interview or you talk to your network and you say, I'm industry agnostic, well, I don't want to introduce you to somebody just for you to later decide that's not an industry, or somebody who's worked in that industry for 20 years and is pretty proud of it, and that's you coming and saying, I don't care about industry, it doesn't make a difference. That's not going to happen. So it's kind of the equivalent of, again, if you're asking for help, you need to be easy to help, and you need to also show that you're committed to the path that you want to go on, because I'm not going to take a risk on somebody who appears to have just read an article or saw a video and decided, yes, this is the career for me, because they might change their mind. So I want to see, either as a hiring manager or as somebody who's going to help you network, I want to see that you've committed. I want to see that you've taken steps towards doing your plan A, whether that's a self-created internship or a gig or a side hustle or taking some certifications. I want to see some investment for you before I'm willing to invest. And unfortunately, you can't really dual brand on LinkedIn, and you can't really invest yourself if you have all of these multiple paths. Now, for those who say, but what if it doesn't work out? And here's the deal, you always have a plan B, because the fact is, especially if you're a mid-career professional, you've built up a great network, you've built up a great skill set, and I've seen people make the change back to their old job because either the switch wasn't what they thought, or it moved in a direction they didn't want to go. So you're always going to have that fallback. You don't lose all of that when you make a decision to target something else. But if while you're targeting that next step, you don't put 100% into it, you're going to significantly diminish your chances of getting it, because here's the deal. If you tell me you have a plan B, you're basically telling me you don't believe in your ability to do it, which means I'm not going to hire you to do it.
Absolutely. You almost already prevented yourself from even taking that next step, essentially. So if you have doubts, it's unlikely that it's going to happen.
Yeah, yes. Confidence breeds confidence. And I tell people, if you come in and you're confident, I mean, that's not the 100% of the picture, but I will tell you, that's going to make me as a hiring person feel more confident in you versus somebody who says, well, if this doesn't work out, I'm like, wait a minute, what do you mean if this doesn't work out? You're not confident in your abilities, but you want me to pay you and give you benefits and put you in front of my clients? That's not going to happen.
Yeah, choice of words, right? When we're trying to sell ourselves to somebody. We have just a few more minutes left, guys. So if you still have some questions, drop those now. And we also have a question about, let's say you did a degree, maybe it was a bachelor's, maybe it was a master's, and by the time you finish the degree, it is no longer even applicable. Maybe you say, you know what, I don't really want to do it. I just didn't, I decided to continue it because I already invested so much time. Should you then follow the path of pursuing your degree, or should you say, you know what, my heart is actually somewhere else, maybe I should give something else a shot?
Yeah, your heart is gonna nag you. So I think it's tough to cut losses. I get that, but part of being a successful switcher, it goes back to those sacrifices and being able to in some ways cut ties with your identity in certain ways and rebuild a new brand and a new identity in other ways. And that's hard. That is hard, because especially mid-career, because of how much time and money we've invested. But I've had this happen, and I've had somebody who wanted to make a career switch to be a speech audiologist, I believe. And her first step was going back to school and taking a 2-year program. And at the end of the program, they did an internship. And when she was actually doing the work, she realized, this is not for me. It's not at all what I expected. And I've already invested all this money. And my point is, I'm like, in 5 years, what are you going to wish you had done right now? You're going to wish you used this degree and continued in a profession that seems to make you miserable, that doesn't really align with your values and goals, or are you going to wish that you started on a path to a career that does fulfill you? So chances are, if you've this is why I tell people, don't start with a degree. If you're interested in a career switch, and a degree is a useful part, first do your homework, first talk to people, first try it out, try it on, see if you can shadow people, because you can make a very expensive mistake if you go to school first and realize it's not what you want to do. But secondly, if you've invested in education, you've likely built contacts, you've likely built some transferable skills, so all is not lost in this pursuit. But we know from research that regrets in the form of things you didn't do are much more lasting than in terms of things you did do. So if you think 5 years from now, I wish I would have started on a different path, then you probably want to get started on a different path right now.
Yes. And the final question, I think we're just right out of time, is, well, now we have a few more that jumped in, but so the final question is for somebody who, if they're looking to perhaps look to migrate to a different country, how does that job search look like? So if you're just, maybe going into a completely new culture, a new way of work, or maybe even in the States, maybe going from state to state, which is also a completely different culture in many cases, right? So how would that look like?
So I think right now that's a little bit harder to do than it might have been a year ago because of all of the travel restrictions. Flip side of that is that more companies are embracing remote work. So you may be able to get a job with a company that is in a different country while still working in your primary country. So it really depends on your motives. Are you looking to move because you want to geographically be somewhere else? Or are you looking to get hired by a company that just happens to be geographically in another country? So one of the things that I would say is the easiest way to do it is typically to get a job in a global organization that enables people to move to different countries depending on the different departments and where things are located. That's typically the easiest way to do that, because then you have a job, you understand kind of the core culture of the organization, and you can start to do that. But I think right now, if you're looking to get on that path and you'd like to live somewhere else, and you've already been there and you've traveled, and if you haven't done that, you definitely want to do that first. But start building connections with people in the local office or in the local area. It's so much easier now with the internet and social media and LinkedIn than it used to be 20 years ago. So I think start to build those relationships, start to understand what some of the barriers might be so you can start to overcome them, and maybe even start remotely, as more companies are open to that right now, and get immersed that way. Because I think a lot of people have learned that working remotely works better than they thought it would work. But over time, companies are going to go back to the office culture. So you may have an opportunity to move within a company versus moving and then looking for something when you get there.
And just one final question, because I think it's brilliant, and I think it's something many people might be struggling with. So somebody mentioned, you rightly said that everyone in your professional network, but this also includes your boss. So how do you utilize your network wisely and ensure that the hiring manager you're targeting would not put your current job at risk, especially when you apply within the same industry?
So the stealth job search, as I call it, how can you be stealth in your job search? So yeah, I think anytime you're making a change, there's always some level of risk. A couple of things that are in your favor. I think one, if you are a regular networker, as we've been talking about, if you look at this as something you do daily or something you do regularly, you regularly attend events, you regularly look online to comment on people's posts or share, introduce people, then it's not going to look any different when you're necessarily in a job search. So if you're not that type of person, I would start being that type of person so that your boss recognizes that you're always updating your LinkedIn and you're always connecting with new people. And this is just kind of a natural part of who you are. And they should be doing it too, because the fact is that, you know, we all are eventually going to be in a career search. The other thing is we know that people tend to be on average in jobs about 4 years. We know that the people are going to change careers a lot more today than they did 2 decades ago. So chances are, if you've been at a company a few years and you have regular performance reviews and you're asking for more work, or you're asking to do different things, your manager is already aware that you're not satisfied. So they may actually know more than you think. But what I would say is that you, as a worker, as somebody who's been laid off twice in my career, you as a worker should always be looking for a job. And what I mean by that is not necessarily actively applying to jobs, but always be open to opportunities. Always make sure your LinkedIn profile reflects who you are and what you bring to the market today, not 3 years ago. Always be connecting on LinkedIn with people you meet in webinars or in people you meet at the office, because the fact is that we're all going to have to make a career change at some point. And if you're doing these things constantly, it's not going to be as noticeable to your manager. And the fact is, if you're looking to make a change in the same industry, my question for you is, whatever the challenge you're having at your current company, maybe you're not paid enough, maybe you're not getting the cool clients or the best project, have you spoken to your manager about this? Because sometimes they're just not aware of what you want. So before you necessarily jump ship, a lot of times you can create what you want where you are if you just have that conversation with your manager. And if you feel like, well, they're not going to give it to me anyway, then, you know, it may be time to make your next move, but at least you've given them the opportunity to perhaps, you know, have a shot there.
I love the point about, you know, to continuously sort of look for work, not in a sense that you're searching, but in a sense to continuously engage with your network, to continuously sort of maintain your personal brand, put yourself out there, talk to people, do that self-reflection. And that's in a nutshell, I think that's a very nice summary of everything that we're talking about as well. So it's, you know, it's just, it's working on your personal brand, continuously checking in with yourself and expanding your network, and just to because we never know what's going to happen. And in the cases like what happened with COVID, nobody could have predicted it. Nobody could have predicted it. And it's absolutely some great tips for us to keep in mind. We're out of time, guys. I know there's still a couple more questions, so feel free to reach out just on email if you would like to ask a few questions. To get in touch with Dawn, you can definitely follow her on LinkedIn. She offers amazing content. Check her articles on Forbes. Her book is by far one of my favorite books so far this year that I've read into when it comes to career change. It's available on Amazon. Definitely check it out. Visit her website as well. She has her own blog where she posts different content. And thank you for sharing all the knowledge, Dawn. And thank you guys for listening. Dawn, thank you so much for the time, for answering the questions. I'm sure it's been very valuable, and people are dropping thank yous as well. So
yeah, thank you, Elena. This is actually one of my favorite topics to talk about. And as an introvert, I am even more convinced that my fellow introverts and I, if we want to get the same opportunities as maybe our more extroverted peers, we have to do this. We have to find ways we're comfortable with building our network. And if you find ways you're comfortable with it, stick with it, make it a habit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dawn. Thank you, guys. And we'll stay in touch, and looking forward to more books and more content from you as well.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.